Locally led adaptation, and it's my great pleasure to introduce to you our two panelists. We have here Ms. Meike van Ginneken. Meike van Ginneken is the water envoy of the Netherlands, and as such she raises water awareness, builds coalitions across countries and organizations, and shares know-how for a water secure world. Ms. van Ginneken is a recognized water leader who has helped to provide millions of people with access to water and sanitation and energy services. She has interspersed executive headquarter positions at international organizations with extended periods living and working in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And she served as UN Assistant Secretary General at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and as Chief Executive Officer of SNV, Netherlands Development Organization. She headed a knowledge-driven organization with 1,400 specialized staff working on food, water, and energy. And last but not least, she had various leadership positions at the World Bank, where she, amongst others, managed $5 billion energy portfolio in West Africa and $6 billion water portfolio in South Asia. Then there we have Jan Zwart. Jan Zwart has a MSc in Industrial Management. He has been CEO of several companies in the Akzo Nobel Group, including 10 years as CEO of Eka Chemicals, which has its headquarters in Sweden, which was then the largest chemical supplier to the pulp and paper industry, and was building chemical plants adjacent to and in cooperation with customers. And he has 5 years experience as CEO of functional chemicals with a turnover of approximate 2,000 million euros. That's a lot. Yeah, I was about to say, I'm lost here in numbers. And now he is CEO of Easy Mining, which is a daughter company of Rheinzels. Yeah, and he's also board member of several medium-sized companies and the chairman of on Swedish Bio-Innovation Fund. So I think we have quite an impressive panel here. So I would already give them a big applause for being here with us. So today we're going to speak about locally led adaptation. Yeah. And the purpose of this session is a little bit to see at the role of public policy and international development in promoting and adapting locally led adaptation, to see what the role of economic actors is to remove barriers in deploying locally led adaptation, and emphasize the importance of partnerships between different stakeholders. What we've seen is that really locally led adaptation, it has been the cornerstone in the UN Water Action Agenda, embodying a commitment to grassroots empowerment and sustainable resilience, while recognizing that communities and local actors are really at the forefront of water-related challenges. It emphasizes the need for inclusive, community-driven approaches, and as such, locally led adaptation strategies rooted in intimate knowledge of specific context not only enhance the efficacy of water management, but also foster ownership and resilience. So, Meike, we agreed we can, during discussion, we will use first names. So, Meike, I'm curious, what are some of the vital transformative commitments in the UN Water Action Agenda regarding locally led adaptation?
Thank you. And let me start by reminding us that climate mitigation is CO2 and climate adaptation is H2O. Locally led adaptation is all about water. People experience climate change through water, through the flooding of their homes, through the failing of their harvest, through hunger. And we need to make water the engine of climate adaptation. And this requires action at the local level. And let me use a few examples, because if you think at the local level, who needs to lead on this? I think it's mayors. I think it's civil society and community groups, and I think it's women and girls. So let me use an example of each of those. We're very happy to see that around the world mayors are speaking up about water and climate. And since the water conference in March in New York, we've seen a great mobilization of mayors. And if you walk around the COP here, mayors from around the world are present. They feel the impact of adaptation and they're taking action. They're not waiting for their national governments to act. And I think it's that action that's important. No conferences are just milestones, but we see very exciting action around the world. I visited Cartagena in Colombia not that long ago. And their citizens and city leadership are joining forces to design priority investments to make Cartagena water and climate resilience. They're envisioning how they can build a livable city in a changing climate. They're looking for financiers, and they're using water as leverage to improve the livability of the city. But it's not just mayor and local authorities. Around the world, communities are pushing local authorities and are not waiting for large infrastructure that might take decades to arrive. Local authorities and civil society are investing in early warning, early action for climate adaptation. I think the world champion of this is Bangladesh. Bangladesh was frequently in the news in the 1970s when there was a typhoon there. There could be hundreds of thousands of lost lives. The frequency and severity of floods have actually increased with climate change. But the number of lives lost has decreased incredibly through these early warning, early action systems. For instance, in 2020, you had super typhoon Amphan, and only 124 people were killed. Of course, 124 people is too many. We want 0 people killed. But without these early warning, early action systems, probably hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. So again, another example of locally led adaptation. And as the government of the Netherlands, we're happy to finance a program called Water at the Heart of Climate Change that works with local authorities and communities in 4 countries in Africa, in Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, and Uganda, to help these countries to set up these early warning, early action systems. What do you need? Better data. You need to make sure that the data reach the communities early, and you need to make sure that these communities actually have the power and the capacity to take action when they get this news. But I think that's an important part of locally led adaptation. Let me get to girls and women. I am from a country with a feminist foreign policy, and I'm very proud of that. Look, girls and women are the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change, but they also are leaders to make water the engine of climate adaptation. They often know much better than men, much better than civil servants, much better than ministers, what needs to happen to build resilience in their communities. But their voices are not heard, and we need to make their voices heard. I love initiatives like the Water Justice Fund that support women and girls to have a voice in water management and climate adaptation. I'm happy that nowadays there's many more women here at the COP and we get our voice heard here. But the real voices to be heard are the women and girls in communities, so that their ideas about locally led adaptation are being implemented around the world.
Thank you very much. Then we go to the other side. I mean, we've seen the public side now, then we continue with the private side, because in the UN Water Action Agenda also addresses, of course, the private sector. And we've seen that really the emphasis has been on creating partnership and coordination. And I think economic actors there have an important role, both as problem owner but also as solution provider. And Jan, can you share with us some examples of, I would say, good practices that you have been able to implement as solution provider?
Yes, thank you. I think, I just draw one conclusion from, I was in a nice roundtable this morning, and it was about 3 things came up to me. And one is, as a solution provider, I think a lot of the solution will come from the private sector. We will be able to develop, but we have to be much better to collaborate with the municipalities, like you mentioned, and of course also with the legislators. And I think because most legislations around the world is linear, and actually completely linear. And if you want to do something circular, then it doesn't really fit in the legislation. So my example of this legislation is that we are able to do a phosphorus product taken out from sludge, from wastewater, and it's the purest phosphorus product that you could imagine. And then the problem is that it's not allowed to use in the highest value applications in Europe. Other countries around the world it might be possible, but in Europe you cannot use it for feed and so on, because the legislation was built up when there was no circular economy. So I think here we need to be a lot better in collaborating with the legislators. And then of course it's about investing in the future. I think that is a lot of the people who actually run the wastewater treatment plants, they have a very short time horizon, even if the capex that they do is going to be there for 50, 100 or whatever years, but they have a budget that is the next year. They don't have a budget for the next 50 or 100 years. Maybe that would be too much, but still it's too short. And they are also controlled by financial measures that you need to reduce your variable cost with 0.5% per year or so, or something, while maybe the refurbishment requires an increase just to be efficient in the long run. So I think here the price of water or price of clean water needs to be maintained, so you actually can do a profit in the wastewater facilities, and then also sell products, because you can bring up wastewater, you can bring up phosphorus that I mentioned, you can bring up nitrogen, it's another fertilizer that is produced very expensively today. You can bring up iron, you can bring aluminum and so on. It's a lot of good stuff in the sludge. So, but I think this is the point, that so legislation, price of clean water and the security of supply.
So Jan, if I hear you, you say the drivers for innovation change in the water sector deal with legislation, the price of water, and I also taste a little bit the awareness of the I would say incoming water crisis. Yeah, and I would say you have solutions there, but you're limited often by a legal context. Is that correct? Yes. So then I turn back to the public side, yeah, and see, in your view, what can you do about, I would say, meeting the challenges of the private side, so that they can actually go about implementing these transformational systematic changes?
Thanks. And we always end up talking about problems. Let's not forget that there is a lot of action going on. You mentioned some of it, but if you think about the more than 800 actions in the Water Action Agenda, everybody around the world, farmers, private sector, public sector, mayors, civil society groups are working on that. But we need to do more. And I actually want to focus on finance, because we need more climate adaptation finance now. It's very hotly debated in the negotiations as we speak. And the UNED adaptation gap report indicates that the adaptation financing gap is widening. At COP28, we agreed to prioritize adaptation and to double the financing for climate adaptation. We're currently not on the right track. Read the latest OECD reports. Adaptation financing actually fell from 2020 to 2021. And importantly, only 9% of private climate finance in developing countries went to adaptation. It's easier to attract private finance to mitigation than it is to adaptation. And that doesn't mean that the private sector is not important in innovation and bringing their ideas, but it is about some of the things you talked about. It's about the nature of adaptation, investments. And what I do not hear enough at this COP is that climate adaptation requires very distinct financing approaches compared to climate mitigation. We need patient capital. Let me explain. Climate adaptation is a classic public good. It has large economic benefits, but it's very hard to translate those economic benefits into financial revenue streams. You talked about water pricing for drinking water. That's still relatively easy. It's politically difficult, but you actually know you can put a meter in somebody's house and you can actually charge them for it. But what about restoration of wetlands? What about flood protection? What about the protection of groundwater? These are all classic public good. And the infrastructure we need for adaptation last decades. You talked about it. It's not about next year. It's not about 10 years. It's about a century. It's about more than a century. And on top of it, adaptation projects are often complex and site-specific, which means that project-based financing, which is most of our international financing architecture, is extremely transaction intensive. I worked at the World Bank for 17 years. I know how much time and effort it takes for every single project. In my country, in the Netherlands, most of our water finance is actually sector-wide. We have water authorities that charge for their services, wastewater treatment, but also flood protection. They collect 97% of their revenues. That means that because they're water authorities, they don't have any other functions, that money is earmarked to be used for water. They together own a public bank, the Water Authorities Bank, which has a AAA status, which can go and get private money. On a sector-wide approach, but not every time we need to build a dike or we need to build a wastewater treatment plant, we actually need to financial close on that project. So how can we go to sector-wide approaches and make it more sustainable, the finance? And with that, and that's another political difficult decision, is there is a lot of public financing which is in harmful subsidies. Just agricultural subsidies are $635 billion per year. They drive groundwater depletion, they drive loss of forests, so how can we use those public resources more useful? And lastly, we're here to talk about locally led adaptation. Another important discussion during this COP is about accessibility of climate finance. Whether it's the MDBs, whether it's the Global Climate Fund, you need to be accredited, there's difficult procedures, and we see that very little of the climate finance actually ends up with people that need it most, with communities. IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, did a survey. Less than 2% of climate finance ends up with smallholder farmers, which are very severely impacted. So the question of how we unblock this climate finance, how we make sure it gets to people like you in Europe, but also to farmers, to utilities, to local mayors, to civil society groups, all around the world, will be, I think, the biggest challenge of the governments that are here, on top of regulation and other issues. But the financing question is central. More money and more money that goes to local communities that need it most.
Thank you very much. Then, Jan, I turn back to you. And I'd like to hear from you, what role should the private sector play in addressing these challenges and building water-resilient cities? And also, you addressed a little bit, what are the barriers you're encountering?
Yeah, so just to some feedback. For us, it doesn't matter so much if it's mitigation or adaptation, because I think you need to, as you say, you need to do both. You know, if you work really circular, there is a lot of toxins that lands in the water, comes to a wastewater treatment plant that you need to take away out of circulation. I think I always said that circular systems are excellent, but if you don't have a detoxification step in them, it actually makes things work, because then you accumulate it in every circle. So for example, one of our daughter companies work with a system to take away PFAS, which is of course an increasing worry, environmental worry. Yeah, and it's everywhere. And then I don't know if that's mitigation or adaptation, but it's something in between. The same, you look at eutrophication. It's if you have too much phosphorus or nitrogen in the wrong location, of course they need to be there, but if it's too much, you get a huge problem environmentally.
A small problem in my country.
Yeah, I think it's quite big issue. so you know, but I totally agree with the financing aspect, because somebody needs to pay for this detoxification, you know, pay for the historical sins that are there in the system. So that is key. And the other point that I always try to make is that if one is not just a private sector, one supplier, it's probably multiple. And it's not just one municipality, but it's multiple. And you need to create new networks. You need to create new partnerships and so on. So for example, in our phosphorus project, there we have a partnership with somebody who takes care of the iron. You have a partnership with a fertilizer company. You have a partnership with the farmers. You have, you know, fertilizer with the chemical industry that takes the aluminum and so on. So you need to build completely new, I call it value circles. Yeah. It's you know, it's not the value chain anymore. So and that also needs to be stimulated. And then the final problem there, Dirk, is that I say very hard for, and I fully understand them, for these municipalities to say, I want to order something that does this. So, because maybe this is one of its kind. And then to have these specific, you know, tender rules that is there makes it very hard for them to jump on a new train. And I think that is one of the things that slows down progression.
Okay, thank you. I have another question. So as Water Europe, we are working, I mean, mostly in a European context, but we're also trying to export that globally with an innovation context, what we call water-oriented living labs, which is really, I would say, a context where you bring business, public authorities, civil society, and research together, yeah, in, I would say, a geographical limited space, which is also limited in time, because it's really addressed to solve a specific challenge. We've been able to really I would say include this in the European research and innovation context. But one of the conclusions that we've done by analyzing a lot of initiatives which are already out there in Europe, that they always depend on public financing. Yeah? You already mentioned that it's fairly difficult globally to get the money to, I would say, the real grassroots stakeholders. Have you, for yourself, an answer on how that could be improved? Because I think it's quite a challenge, especially if you work like as a Dutch government. I would say you work on a global scale where you are confronted with so many diverse circumstances.
Yeah, look, I think changing from a linear system to a circular system in the urban context, also in the rural context with reuse of irrigation water, is extremely important. You need to come together with the private sector, the public sector, research institutions and civil society. And it's also true that if you need new knowledge, you often need a little bit of money, because that doesn't come for free. Whether that's public or private depends. I mean, in many countries, it starts actually by the private sector and farmers and citizens paying for water use and paying for pollution. The polluter pays and the user pays, so that you actually can create additional resources, either with utilities or with governments. So I think this, is it private sector, is it public sector? Everybody needs to pay for the water they use and for the pollution they cause. And then, of course, in these public goods, you need to see how you organize yourself through tax systems. I think in terms of how do you get money to local initiatives is difficult, but it's possible. And there is a role here of, dare I say, intermediaries. Of course, the Dutch government shouldn't by itself go to a local community group in southeastern Zambia and try to administer that money one at a time, because we need scale. We don't need it in one. community. We don't need it in 10 communities. We don't need it in 1,000 communities. We need it in 10,000 of communities. So larger civil society groups, associations of industry, associations of research institutes are important to channel this money. We need to find ways that these associations work in a lean and mean way, so that not all the money goes to these associations because they're very nice, but in the end it needs to go to local activities. I think we have good examples where this works. We need to scale those up, and we need to make sure that people do the things they're best placed to do. I also think we need to recognize the role of governments in countries in the global south and trust them that they actually work with all of those groups and are a convener to create change. They often are the ones that can do at scale change. So I think distinguishing between what's a pilot and who needs to be involved in that and what's the scale up. And for the financing streams, you actually need different approaches to that and not get stuck in piloting things that already have been piloted. We need to mainstream these, and these things need to be normal. Circular water systems need to be normal. That's what our aim is.
Thank you. Can you then, Jan, because these type of, I would say, co-creation environments, as I was just referring to, that of course need public finance, but also need private investment. How can it be useful for your innovative solutions? And a question I would also like to ask you there, to what degree would the potential of legal derogation, temporary for that specific purpose, just to test new systematic approaches, can be useful?
No, I think it can be very useful, and just to give, because you also have to be aware that you have a problem. Not always the case, So if you take our nitrogen solution, which is you're basically catching nitrogen in the reject water of a wastewater treatment plant, and you make a fertilizer of it. But when a nitrogen fertilizer is produced, I think it represents 2% of the global emissions of carbon dioxide or something. It's natural gas and air. But then actually in the wastewater treatment facility itself, it's big emissions of N2O, or laughing gas. And most wastewater treatment plants are not aware of it. So of course, when they start to measure, this becomes a big number, and it's we have had contact with a professor in the UK, and he claims this is 7% of the global emissions or something, on carbon dioxide equivalents, because N2O is so. So first, you need to have the awareness, and you need to start to measure, and then you can plug in things like, okay, what is the cost of nitrogen emissions, for example, or there has to be a carbon dioxide tax or equivalent tax. So, but I think that has a big impact. But I think the very biggest impact is if you're also allowed to sell the products that you produce there. There is no legal hindrances for the products, for the best available. It has to be the quality of the product that you do. And in my mind, recycled products should be same quality or better than the mined products. But if you're not allowed to sell them based on where they come from instead of based on the quality of the product, I think that is the major item that needs to be handled in the legislation.
Okay, good. Maaike?
Yeah, legislation is nearly always running behind the reality. No, that's the nature of legislation. And I do think there's real reasons that governments might be a little bit conservative if it considers public health risks. So the question is, how do you change this? And it's logical there's a little bit of time lag, but sometimes these time lags are a little bit long, no? And proven technologies are not being introduced. I think whether you call it derogation, derogation, it's a word I can't pronounce, as you hear. You can also call it a pilot solution, which is a little bit of more of a positive spin to it, right? We're going to try this rather than you're now allowed to do something that we think is actually a risk to public health. It's not the best way of marketing this. But I do think that you need to see how you, in circumstances that are controlled, where there's a lot of monitoring, you can actually prove that this is not harmful, that it's beneficial, because that burden of proof is on you when you have innovation. And I think in many instances we know how to do this, but we need together between the private sector, the public sector and academia, we need sometimes to be much more aware and explicit of what these strategies are and why you pilot and what's the next steps, and have a discussion up front. Okay, if we've done this and we pilot it in one city or in 2 cities, then we can actually talk about change of legislation. In Europe that's difficult because some of the legislation is national, some of it is EU-wide. But I think that's something we need to do together between different actors, and I think there's good examples. But sometimes innovation, and especially on the circular economy, is going that fast that governments are trying to catch up, and we need to keep pushing them to go a little bit faster. But I'm sure that if you invite us back in 5 years, the legislative landscape will be very different.
I'm quite sure of that. Jan, just question to you and follow up there. I mean, Meike, in her initial words, she really emphasized the importance of working with local communities, working with mayors, working also with women and girls. From your perspective as a private player, do you work with those local communities? Do you work with, I would say, mayors? Do you work with, I would say, women and girls? How does it work from your perspective?
Yeah, no, of course, you have to, particularly the mayors and
Yeah.
local politicians and so on, if they don't want these new solutions, nothing is going to happen. Because as we said, legislation is happening, but extremely slowly. And I think the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive in Europe is a good example. It's taken 20 years and now it's there, and then it's get dewatered, and it's, so it goes in the right direction, but very, very slow. But then the only way to go forward is that you have local champions. So I think that is key, and that's why you need to work locally with the, consortium of the willing, if you want. That is key.
Good.
And luckily, more and more often, these mayors are the women and the girls.
Very good. Are there any questions from the audience? I will start at the back.
Oh, thank you so much. I will ask to stand. My name is Andrei Juka. I'm a water journalist based in Uganda. I work for Infonile, which is a geojournalist platform or organization that brings together journalists across the Nile Basin that are reporting about biodiversity and water. I like the fact that the gentleman talked about awareness. One of the things I've recognized or that I've observed at COP is that most pavilions don't have the media in them. And you realize that the media is the fourth estate. So when you talk about the executive, you talk about the legislation, which is more, and also the judiciary. Basically, the legislation and the judiciary and the executive are working more like together. The fourth estate, which is the media, which is supposed to take, this information to the downer people, get them, aware of these things, and maybe even get feedback. On, getting feedback, you could even get the solutions that people think, could help them. So my view is that I really urge the Water Pavilion to always put in mind, the things that we are discussing here, to put in mind the media, because I will take some bit of time. Apologies for that. But I'll give an example. Last week I was in Kasese. Kasese is in the western part of Uganda. It is having the Renzoris, if you've heard of Mountain Renzori. The glaciers there are melting. And when we had sponsored a journalist to do a story, finding why, the glaciers are melting. So he went in the communities and did the story. And so after this, we took back the story to the community. So when we screened this documentary to them, we asked them, what do you think about this? Lots of, suggestions were given. Something that was so exciting was that because they, look at the glaciers really so much. I'll give an example of the lady. The lady said they would, whenever they were growing up, they would be referred to as, you're beautiful like the snow. So now that the snow is getting down, you no longer have a reference of even beauty. So you can see such, nitty-gritties that are being brought up in the discussions. And at the end of it all, people started committing because after the screening of the documentary, we had them, into discussion groups, and then after that, we asked them to commit. And some of them were committing to plant a tree instead of buying a cake on their birthday. Some of them were committing to plant a tree once they give birth maybe to a baby girl or to a baby boy. So I believe that if we leave out the media in all these discussions, especially the funding, because as Infonai, we are struggling with funding journalists to do these science stories. You realize in the global health, politics plays a very big role, and people like so much to do politics, and most newsrooms are being headed by politicians. You won't have these science stories if you are not funding media houses to do science stories. It is an expensive venture, but for you to make the communities aware of this, you have to fund the media so that they can be able to tell these stories and then go back again to get the feedback. And then this feedback can be tabled to the policymakers to make an informed decision. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you give the... Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. I think the media is very important, or the population is very important. We need to raise the awareness. We need to do things together. Besides I'm a member of the Board of Water Europe, I'm also chairman globally for International Chamber of Commerce work on circular economy. And tomorrow we are launching the 5 key enablers how industry can contribute to make sure that we fulfill the ambitions in the Paris Agreement. And water is the 5th enabler that we need to address. Industry needs circular water, but we also believe that we need to make sure that Europe can take the lead, demonstrating what is possible. And I think Netherlands is a good example of really demonstrating the ambassadorship, how it can be done. I know that you're traveling all around the world. I met Netherlands in the UN Water Conference, where you were one of the 2 sponsors. And of course, I was moderating a panel discussion there, and I was a little bit afraid because when I landed, the ABC News about media, they said, well, sorry, people in Florida, this year you should not take a bath in the ocean. It's too much cyanobacteria in the ocean. So avoid it. Too much nitrogen and phosphorus was the reason. So my question is to you is, of course, how can we make sure that we unite together to show the world what we've done, but also make sure that we are the role models?
Thank you. And, sorry, you have the gentleman here.
If I can get a third one and you you will recognize all of them, I'll try. I'm Mario Lutz. I'm from BMZ, the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And I took 2 main lessons from this session. One is financing is very hard for local actors to get. And I don't know if you could just name a few positive examples where this worked out in practice and where local actors really could develop a project and get the right financing from. That would be interesting. And the second message I got was that legislation and bureaucracy is a big problem for entrepreneurs. I think, Jan, you mentioned this, that tenders, for example, are difficult here. So my question would be, what would an entrepreneur need from local government, national government, to overcome these bureaucratic barriers? Thank you.
Thank you. I will take some more questions and then we return.
Hello. I'm Dr. Pradeep Punia, India. My organization is working in northern western part of the Rajasthan that is known as Thar Desert. We are the entrance point of the Thar Desert. Water scarcity is the main problems of our areas. Government have planned many schemes or programs, but they have just only accomplished on the basis of closed room basis. They have not involved the local populations. So in the program executions, local involvement is absolutely zero. The situations of drinking water and regarding other water is always exists in the area. I am here request to this water for climate. How can CSO or other local group involve in this policy framing? Is such kind of policy be taken by this international forum?
There's a gentleman behind you who wanted to ask a question.
Thank you. My name is Johannes Sirunda from a bulk water supplier in Namibia, south of Africa. I think you all mentioned water innovation or innovative technology as a means to adapt to the effect of climate change. Now, if you look at this innovative water technology in terms of absorption, it's sometimes very low or very slow, especially in developing countries. Now, to ensure that these countries now adapt to the effect of climate change, what other approaches which could be considered by the private and public sector to improve or to increase absorption of some of these water technologies? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to conclude with those questions because we're running out of time. I will briefly summarize the main points that were asked. So first question was about the importance of media. I think that is a very important point also to communicate the good examples, both downward and upward also to, I would say, politicians and the funding for that. The second... Exactly. Then it's about the leadership, yeah, and the role of leadership. Then we had a question by the gentleman from Germany about positive examples for finance, and if you could give also some examples of what we need from legislation to overcome bureaucracy. We had the question about how to engage local actors in policy shaping, and then the last one, how to enable the uptake of innovation in, I would say, in local communities. Who wants to start?
Thank you. The role of free media is extremely important, both in storytelling of good examples and how climate adaptation works in practice, but also in keeping both public sector and the private sector honest in doing the right thing. The question on role models of the EU and role models of the Netherlands, I can commit to the Netherlands continuing to play an important role in international water diplomacy. I don't think we're a role model. We need to both share our knowledge, but we also need to be humble and learn from others and learn together. So I don't see myself or my own country so much as a role model as a respectful global citizen. Positive experience of local finance. I don't know how many hours you have. Let me mention 3. There's a lot of exciting things happening. A couple of years ago, I met a lady farmer in Ethiopia that with the help of SNV Netherlands Development Organization was able to grow seeds for climate-resistant stocks. I visited the public utility in Burkina Faso, which is doing great new technology with financing from the World Bank, and I worked with local communities in sanitation in Nepal. So don't think everything is not working. There's a lot of good things working. We need to do more, faster and better. Probably one thing on public procurement. Yes, sometimes it's cumbersome. It might be in the way of innovation, but public procurement is a good thing. It means that we actually use public money wisely and we fight fraud. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It needs to be more flexible so innovation has a place. Let me finish by saying on the questions of water scarcity and a number of the other questions, people experience climate change through water. And we need to make water the engine of climate adaptation in water scarce area, in areas that are prone to flooding. 3 things we need to do for that. 1 is engineering and technology. You've talked a lot about that. Second, we need to realize that not everything is possible anymore everywhere. We cannot grow cotton in the desert. We cannot build our cities in flood-prone areas. So we need to make water and soil the leading guiding principles of our spatial planning and our economic development. And third, we need to protect our freshwater stocks in nature. 99% of freshwater is stored in nature, in wetlands, in lakes, in rivers, in groundwater. These are our buffers for water scarce period, so that we still have water to grow our food and to drink, and for if there's too much rainfall and we need to store excess rainwater. So these things are important. We need to work together with the private sector, the public sector. We need the financing, we need the regulation, but we need the action now.
Thank you.
I don't know if I can add so much to that, but let me add one thing. I have these 2 So it's, for me, it's legislation and collaboration. So if there is a legislation that makes sure that this is required, that you can sell it to the highest, highest bidder or best use, I think there is financing is going to come relatively easy because private sector wants to invest if it's profitable. But you have to allow it. I think that's the one. And the other one is collaboration, because if in the water sector, this is, private or public monopolies very much, and you need to have long contracts and long collaborations. You cannot come in and out every year. So I think that's another way of financing if you go really tight. And we have one example now where we're creating a joint venture in Germany. And Germany has legislation that you have to recover phosphorus 2029. So of course, all private companies come in and said, how can we solve this? How can we make money from this? And then you have a collaboration with public entities. So I think collaboration and legislation.
Okay, thank you very much. Then as a few concluding words from my side. So I think we've heard about the importance of partnership. We've heard about the importance of legislation. We've heard also about the importance of finance and also the right expectations in time scale. I think what was also very important, we heard about, I would say, do not only focus on the challenges that we have, also focus on the many examples of good solutions that are out there. I think very important. Now, with regard of the finance, we've heard about it's important to have public finance, private finance, combine it and make sure that it is accessible and reaches the, I would say, really the grassroots level where it's really necessary. And we heard it's only 2% of the finance that is actually getting there. Another few words that I jotted down is in the collaboration, we need to have trust. Trust between, I would say, the financiers and the local communities that, I would say, the money is used well. At the same time, of course, we have to be vigilant that the way we do this remains lean and mean, especially with the organized stakeholders that serve as intermediaries. And last but not least, I think we heard a very important, I would say, focus on the media, and that we strengthen the communication so that, I would say, these good examples that are out there are either communicated horizontally to other stakeholders, downward to the local communities, but also upward, I would say, to the policymakers to really show and demonstrate what is possible. Yeah. So with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Thank you very much for your involvement in the discussion. And I hope to see you at another moment in time during this conference. Thank you very much. Sorry? Yes?
Okay.
Okay. You want a quick picture?
Picture? Okay.